Welcome to An Outside View. I'm your host, Dick Zaccaro, and joining me today is my special guest, Joy Petti. Joy, welcome to An Outside View.
Thank you for having me, Dick.
Thank you. Today is a special day for the taping of our show, being the anniversary of Russell Means passing on this date in 2012 on the Pine Ridge Oglala Sioux Reservation, where I've been a tribal member since 1993. Russell was a Native American activist who founded AIM, an acronym for American Indian Movement, and spearheaded the Wounded Knee Uprising in 1973, where they occupied the reservation there for more than 70 days. He was tried, convicted, then found innocent for the shooting of an FBI agent delivering a summons to him on the reservation. Now I'm going to get into my guest, special guest, and I asked her for many reasons to come on the show. About Joy Petti, we have a lot in common. We are both originally from Brockton, Mass., City of Champions, home of Rocky Marciano and Marvin Hagler, Sioux City. We are both authors, having written and published several books. We have an interest in Native American culture, the environment, and both are nature and animal lovers. Joy is also an avid reader, beekeeper, and nutritionist, works for a veterinary clinic, and has been known to be an adventurous and traveler. One of the reasons, which are many, why I invited her to be my co-host today is because she is very connected to the spiritual world and shares many of my similar beliefs in life, especially relating to our original inhabitants of our land being Native Americans. Now let's pause for a brief moment and reflect upon what exactly that means. My personal definition is one who was native to our land and much later known as America. Joy also lived in the mountains in Denver, Colorado for a couple of years in the wilderness and befriended a local Native American, and will share some of her personal experiences there before we get into the life and adventure of my great-great-grandfather's, John Y. Nelson's book called 50 Years on the Trail that Joy is holding a copy of. It was written in the late 1800s, and then I wrote a revision of the book called 50 Years on the Trail, The Forgotten People. And I mean forgotten people, and we'll get into that later as to why I labeled that. So I'm going to ask Joy now to read a passage in one of her brilliant poems that she wrote a few years back relating to our subject matter today about Native Americans and 50 years on the trail. And then I'm going to ask her to read a few paragraphs and excerpts from the revision of my great-great-grandfather's book, and then we'll get into the subject matter today. So once again, Joy, thank you for coming today, and I look forward to your participation in my show.
I'm so happy to be here, and I'm delighted to read a poem from my book, Whispers of Joy, that I wrote in 2020, and I shared it with Dickie just a few minutes ago, so I'm going to share it with you. So it's called Farmer Bill, and they told us he was a philanthropist. That's how we gained our trust. We gazed upon his goodness with respect, and some could say with lust. Until the day when he bought our land and told us what to eat. No more cows, no more milk, as he destroyed farmers via the elite. The Native American Indian had it right since the start of time. And that is when they sold them out and claimed that this is mine. They raped their women and killed their children right there at Wounded Knee. They said it was for the best, and then they took their seeds. The seeds of ancient wisdom and those from Mother Earth, God-given miracles that were here way before our birth. They stripped them of their heritage and God-given rights, fenced them in on barren land with no hope in sight. They say he's a philanthropist. Do you really believe that still? For now we know just what he's done. Let's just call him Farmer Bill.
Excellent, excellent. And you've written many books. And why don't you share with the viewing audience a little bit about your experience for 20 years in Denver, Colorado, living in the wilderness, and how you actually met a local Native American and how life was back then.
There's a lot
I love
there.
the hat, by the way.
Thank you. Well, I ended up in the mountains at between 96 and 10,000 feet. And for a few years, I did live without electricity and water. I had met a Cherokee Indian in the mountains when I was in my early 20s. And yeah, so he was at the Tollgate Saloon. It was at the gold mining center of the country, Central City, Colorado. And the Tollgate Saloon, he was a bouncer, he was a Cherokee Indian. So I had met him, and he was leaving for to visit his family on the reservation. And he brought me up to the cabin and said, "Can you watch this?" And I'm a city girl, right? I'm a city girl from Brockton, Mass, as you said.
Right.
And then I was in Denver. I moved to Denver with my fitness group. So I said, "Sure, I'll do it." And I'm in a cabin, a log cabin. And if you follow me, you know, I have pictures of that socially. So he left, he never came back, and there I was. And that's how I ended up in the mountains at, you know, approximately 10,000 feet. I was at the foot of the Moffat Tunnel for quite a few years without electricity and water, in cabins, multiple cabins, and I learned to live.
Excellent.
That's how I got there. So, yeah.
No running water, no electricity, horseback.
Yep, I did. I used to, later on in life, you know, later, a few years before, after that, I did do pack trips over the Continental Divide on horseback above tree line. We started out at the foot of the Moffat Tunnel, and we would bring our horses over to Winter Park. It would take about 7 days, about 6 nights in the mountains, and camping out and just, you know, eating. And we had our horses, our panniers, and it was just great.
Quite an experience.
Yeah, it was an experience.
Thanks for sharing that story.
Thank you.
So let's get into our show. My great-great-grandfather's name was John Y. Nelson. And he wrote this book, 50 Years on the Trail, back in the late 1800s. It was about his life story and how he ran away from home and ended up befriending the Oglala Sioux Nation in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. And as you can see in the background, I brought a tribal flag. I've been a member there, as I said before, since 1993. Had the personal pleasure and experience of visiting the reservation when I was 10 years old and met my great-grandmother, his daughter, who was referred to as the Indian Girl. Princess Blue Waters was her Indian name. She traveled with Buffalo Bill's circus. Buffalo Bill was a good friend of my great-great-grandfather. Went to actually Wales, met the Prince of Wales. She was invited to the JFK inauguration when he became president. And also, she was a judge on the reservation of Pine Ridge that I visited. And I've been back a couple other times. And I want to kind of get into the book a little. You see, I have my ceremonial Indian beads from the tribe.
Love it.
That they gave me as a gift when I was out there. But the book is a fascinating book. So I was compelled, and I promised my mother, who grew up in Rapid City, South Dakota, with her aunt, I promised her that I would do a documentary. So my hopes are that once someone sees this show that we're doing today, that they carry it a step further and either make a movie script, which I wrote, and trying to get it to a producer to make a movie in Hollywood about it, or a public service documentary that you see like on Channel 2. So our job today is trying to convince people out there to have an interest in the plight of the Native Americans. So after I read my grandfather's book, and Joy's read it, and a lot of my friends have read it, it's a fascinating book. It's available on Amazon.com. The name of it is 50 Years on the Trail, once again, by John Y. Nelson. I felt that I had to write a follow-up and a revision document, and I did back in 2020, and I wrote 50 Years on the Trail, The Forgotten People. So my goal was to describe my grandfather's life, great-great-grandfather's life, as a young boy running away from his home and walking right into the Oglala tribe, which he spotted tail, and transcending his life where the Native Americans were a proud race and they hunted freely, fished freely, roamed freely on the Great Plains of South Dakota. And unfortunately today, they've been confined to reservations. So I'm going to ask Joy, she can read a few passages of my revision that has been copyrighted in Congress and is also available online if you request a copy. So Joy, if you don't mind just reading a few passages, and then we'll get into my great-grandfather's books, some of your perceptions of his book, and some of the highlights that you really appreciate and can relate to, based on your personal experiences.
So 50 Years on the Trail, The Forgotten People, copyright 2020 by Richard Zaccaro. The seasons were quickly changing in the Black Hills of South Dakota, otherwise known as the Badlands, for many different reasons. The crisp fall weather was rapidly turning into an early winter, and the snow was already starting to fall upon the semi-frozen ground. This was the second time and last time that he would run away from home, from his abusive father who beat him regularly. As he kept running at a slow speed, pacing himself, he knew that he had limited time before the sun went down. In the distance, he could see and smell the smoke rising in the sky and realized that he was getting close to his destination, being the hostile camp of one of the greatest warriors of the Lakota tribes, the Oglala Sioux. His hunger overcame his fear and his imminent danger of being an unexpected stranger walking into a teepee of the Oglala Sioux chief, Spotted Tail. His mind and heart began to race, wondering what fate he may suffer at the hands of these red faces. Despite doubting himself, he had made the right decision. He knew that it was too late, already have being spotted by the Oglala scout at the perimeter of their campgrounds. Being 14 years old, he didn't realize the magnitude of his brazen actions, risking his life at the hands of these unpredictable Indians that he had heard so much about growing up. Would he be held hostage? And perhaps scalped by these so-called renegades, or befriended by them.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that with the viewers. So I label them forgotten people. As I said before, I've been to the reservation several times. And it's really depressing to go there. They have a high rate of alcoholism, drug abuse. They have literally one educational facility. They have one medical facility. And I'm talking about the largest Native American tribe in the country, the Oglala Sioux. They have 47,000 inhabitants. The average life expectancy is only 47 years old. So I've been out there. I was trying to help them economically to get what they call an 8A, which is a federal license, where they lose their tax exemption and become a profitable tribe like the Aleut tribe in Alaska. So basically the general contractors, if they bid on a defense contract with Raytheon, they would get 50% of the proceeds, 15%, and they could make upwards of $25 million a year. But they're such a proud race, and they have some very bitter feelings of how they've been treated in the past by the government. So they elected to go with their tax exemption. The federal government tried to make an offer to them, which they stole the Black Hills land from them, which is beautiful. I've been out there. It was rich in minerals and resources. And recently they offered them $1.2 billion for the land, and they turned it down. They said they wanted their land back. So maybe, Joy, we talked earlier about how you relate what happened to the Native Americans with what's going on today. Maybe you want to spend a few minutes and thoughts on that, and we'll get back into the book.
Well, as I read the book, and I was captivated by it, everything that was going on, and as things went on, we got to the Larimer Treaty.
Yes, Treaty Laramie, yeah.
Yeah, and and I'm thinking, wow, okay, let's see how this works out, and they stole from them, and
Right.
so when I comparing it to like today's what's going on today and stuff like that, I kind of compared to, wow, that's sort of what's happening here. And if you go back in history, whether it be with the Sioux Indian tribe or this nation or other wars and stuff like that, it's almost like a repeat thing. They promise, they entice, and they go back on their word. And that's what they did to these poor Native Americans, that they promised so much, and as time went on, they would slice less land. Then the land came out with so many for the 1.2 billion, and then all of a sudden it was less land, and then less land again. They would slice away what they offered, and eventually they took it all.
What Joy is referring to, which is a great historic event, was the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868, which is about the same time my great-great-grandfather wrote this book, 50 Years on the Trail. The treaty was with the United States government, with the Dakota Sioux, where the government recognized the Black Hills as being part of their land, then took it away from them slowly, as Joy made reference to. And you know what the government referred to it as, Joy, back then? They were being ethnically cleansed, whatever that interpretation means. Now, another historic treaty was also the Trial of Tears. And growing up in my home, my mother being quarter Oglala Sioux, and I'm a 16th, registered with the tribe, I'll never forget she had two paintings on the wall. One was the Trial of Tears, and it shows a silhouette of a Native American on a horse, worn out, with his spear between his arms. And what the Trial of Tears in 1830 was about, this was with the Cheyenne Indians. It lasted for 20 years, from 1830 to 1850, where 60,000 Native Americans from six different Cheyenne tribes were displaced from their homeland and forced to live on reservations, just as the Oglala Sioux did in the topic that we just discussed, being Fort Laramie in 1868, which was tragic. It was really tragic. So where we are today is a very sad situation. And I think every school in this country should talk about the plight of the Native Americans, where they were the first inhabitants of our land. So today we're hearing a lot about reparations for different people, and if anyone deserves reparations, which you never hear, it's the Native American that deserves reparations, because there was their land that was taken over by the United States government. And they still have some resentful feelings, obviously, today.
And we had talked, Dick, about just recently, a little while ago, that the Native American was our first natural scientist. They had more wisdom than anyone. They were connected with nature. They were connected with the Great Spirit. You know, however anyone wants to think what their Great Spirit is. They were connected to one Great Spirit, and like in my poem, they just took all that wisdom, and they kind of stifled that. And so, yes, I don't think there's anything more deserving than a Native American to, what is the word I'm looking for? Reparation.
Reparation. Absolutely.
You know, they're so deserving. They were such a beautiful, you know. And I read the book. There's a lot of heinous stuff in here. I mean, they did, you know, there's stuff that the settlers did, the Mormons, the, you know, Latter-day Saints, all the Indian tribes and the whole thing. I mean, it was just like, we need law and order. We totally need that. We need, you know, like this is, you know, pre-civilization for them. And, you know, but I look at it when I finished this book, which was so amazing. And what I got out of it was, you know what? If we actually did what they promised, and we incorporated the Native American with the white settlers and all that, they could have learned so much from the Native American, and maybe the Native American could have learned from the settlers. They could have lived really in harmony and peace. And I think that, I really do believe that. But, you know, like as far as like the government goes and stuff like that, they just need the power and control. And I think they just got the short end of the stick.
Right.
And it's just really kind of sad. And, you know, and then it goes on.
Right, and as we discussed, you're a nutritionist and you know a lot about healthy foods and the environment, and we discussed that the Native Americans had a lot of natural remedies when they were sick, whether it was tree bark, they smoked opium back then, and some of the modern day drugs have been derived from the natural remedies that they founded and used regularly.
Right, right, and you know, that's pretty powerful stuff. That's pretty powerful, and so a lot of people could have learned from that in the early days, but they didn't because it was controlled.
Right,
It was actually pretty much eradicated.
right,
Yeah.
and forced to live on the reservation. So the tribe, the Oglala Sioux, once again, has some very infamous chiefs in the past. They had Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse was imprisoned, and he was stabbed to death at a young age. And by the way, I did research on him. His name came from Crazy Horse, the acronym. When he was supposedly 14 years old, he was hunting with his brother, and a grizzly bear attacked his brother, and he jumped off the horse and actually killed the grizzly bear with a knife. I don't know if it's been documented or not, but that's where you get the name Crazy Horse. And Crazy Horse was also infamous because the Oglala tribe was used as a decoy to distract from General Custer, who was slaughtered by the Indians, and he wasn't really a good guy. His own men were delayed in going there because they knew they were on a suicide mission, that they were outnumbered by 20-1 by the Native Americans. So they basically used 3 tribes, and they used the Oglala Sioux with Crazy Horse to divert the attention of the other 3 tribes that had surrounded Custer and his troops. And they were brutally massacred, but they did not treat the Native Americans good at all. And then I think you also have Spotted Tail. That was the chief when my great-great-grandfather ran away and walked into their tribe. You had Red Cloud, was probably perhaps one of the most famous Indian chiefs of all Native Americans, and I'm a relative of Red Cloud. My great-great-grandfather married a squaw, they call them squaw, the female Indians, in the Oglala Sioux by the name of Jenny Lone Wolf, whose brother was Red Cloud. And you had Sitting Bull. So Sitting Bull was more of a passive chief, and he was the chief at the time when they signed the peace treaties that turned out they didn't really understand fully, and they trusted the government that they would be able to hunt freely and fish in the Black Hills that we discussed that eventually they took away from, which was very sad. So the lifestyle of my great-great-grandfather was just amazing. As he describes it, it's for all those of you that order the book, again, on Amazon.com, it's a great read, but he speaks in proper English. And I don't know if you viewers have seen the series Deadwood, but that's what they used, the proper English back in the day. So he became, from a 14-year-old young adolescent, he was befriended by the Oglala Sioux. He was known as a great buffalo hunter. He was the U.S. Deputy Marshal, gunslinger. He was a bartender in the old country western saloon out there in the Black Hills. Lived a fascinating life. And he was a nomad, similar to Joy, and she's traveled the country and lived in the wilderness, so she can relate to that. And at the end of the book, he ends it with, he said, you know, I could have became very wealthy financially, but I just couldn't settle in one place. And a lot of his friends went west, the old saying, Horace Greeley, go west, young man, where the gold rush was. And they became very wealthy individuals. And in the end, he really had nothing. And he said, the only land that I will own is a 6-foot plot where my body will be buried. So it was a fascinating ending to his book.
It really was. And if I can just add to that a little bit, Dick, that the Sioux Indian tribe, am I saying that correctly?
Right.
Taught him so much virtue and so much baseline, very important things about life, about hunting, I mean, he was just brilliant.
Right.
And he was a righteous man. So
He was.
he met the most really, really bad people
Yes.
during his years
There were a
out
lot of
there
bad
in the
people out
frontier.
there.
I mean, like, so if you read the book, my gosh, he just like came across, but he handled it so righteously, always.
Right.
And that fascinated me. Like, he would just look at someone in the eye and talk and say, hey, well, can we talk about it, but you'd understand when you see it in the book. And I'm like, wow, he got out of that just by being a good guy.
Right.
He was awesome. I mean, just like, I am blown away by him. I learned a lot from him just reading this book. And, but I thought that was like really important, that he got out of the most craziest situations from what he learned through the Sioux
Right.
and life itself, and then just being who he was.
Right. So I'm going to share a few personal stories. The first time I went to Pine Ridge Reservation, the Oglala Sioux Reservation, I was 10 years old, and I always had a fascination with Native Americans, with my mother being 1/16, and all the stories she told me. So my dad at the time had a Chevy Bel Air station wagon. It was probably about a 1957. And we drove to South Dakota. And we arrived on a Friday night. Again, I was 10 years old. And my impression of the Native American, I really wasn't sure, because I watched a lot of cowboy Indian movies. And I always viewed them as hostile people. So as we pulled in that Friday night, they had a ceremonial tribal Indian dance with a fire. They were dressed in full headdress, war paint, banging drums. And all I remember was from the cowboy Indian movies, I said to my father, we better form a wagon train with the station wagon, because they're about ready to attack us. So here comes my grandmother. She was dressed in her dress that weighed 75 pounds, and she was a very petite woman. She was about 4'10", and the dress alone weighed 75 pounds. Today it's in the Cheyenne, Wyoming Indian Museum, and it had coral and turquoise beads. So she said, grandson, it's a pleasure to meet you. And I said, I have one question for you, Grandma. I said, how many cowboys have you killed and white men? And she looked at me in my astonishment and said, I hate to disappoint you, grandson, but none. And that was my first experience with the Oglala. Years later, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I went there for a business opportunity to try to help them out and get some proceeds funneled in to help them with their educational medical facilities. So I landed in Rapid City Airport, which is the closest airport, and it's called the Badlands, and it's called the Badlands for a reason. I'll never forget, I had a meeting with the economical development people on the reservation. So I rented a bright yellow Camaro. And it's about 100 miles from Rapid City, the airport, to the reservation. And I was going 90 miles an hour through the Badlands. So I was envisioning all these movies I saw as a child with the cliffs and the smoke signals that the Indians would send out. And you would see a house about every 10 to 15, 20 miles. I mean, it's very, very barren land. And I came across this big old barn in red paint saying Russell Means. And I said, who is this Russell Means guy? And then I did the research on him, as we talked about his profile earlier, that he was probably the most famous Native American activist, and he fought hard for human rights for the Native Americans. It was painted on the barn. So I always wondered if that's where he lived. And ironically, when I returned from my trip after my meetings and they gave me a tour of the reservation, after I landed in Logan Airport, I was coming out, and one of the walls on the expressway was written, Free Russell Means and Pelletar. Pelletar was his friend, who was also framed for the FBI murders. So I said, this is fascinating. I just came from where he actually lived to Boston, Mass., and his name transcended into Boston on the side of the expressway. And it's just, I encourage everyone to, if you ever have an opportunity, go out there. We went to Mount Rushmore out there with the famous presidents on there, and I had dinner. They had buffalo meat and rattlesnake on the menus. It's beautiful country out there, and the younger generation is starting to realize, as they get educated, you know, how bad things they were, and trying to turn things around today. So it's a unique trip out there, and I had some good memories, and hopefully today, and there's been several movies about the Oglala, by the way. If you ever watch a movie called I Left My Heart in Wounded Knee,
Yes.
it was about a Native American who grew up on Wounded Knee Reservation, and he went to law school. He ended up in Washington, D.C. I think he went to Georgetown, which is one of the best law schools in the country. And then he worked as a government aide to a congressman. And after he saw the inner workings of Washington, D.C., he returned back to the reservation, and he was just appalled at what happens. And I'd like to share another story, personal story. When I was in the investment business for 30 years, I met with President Clinton's executive director of the Department of the Interior, which is the Bureau of American Indian Affairs, falls under that jurisdiction. And I asked him, I said, what's the government doing for Native Americans? And he said, well, we've set up trust funds, and if you live on a reservation, you get a siphon of $1,200 a month from the government for being a Native American residing on the reservations. I said, well, are they getting the money? And he says, on the most part. However, he told me they were in the middle of an audit at the time. Literally, there were billions of dollars unaccounted for that were earmarked for the Native Americans on the reservations. It just was mind-boggling when he told me that. And here we are today.
We are today. Where are the billions of dollars?
Yeah, but I'm planning to go back to the reservation and see once again if I can help them out any way, shape, or form to get some finances. And I want to share a picture with you, actually. I'm going to hold up here. This is the pitch book that I wrote, 50 Years on the Trail of the Forgotten People. And I wrote it for hopefully a Hollywood producer or a public broadcast service station to do a documentary. I'm going to hold it up here. You're close to the camera if you want to hold it up there for the audience. And you can see it.
No.
Yeah, there you go, right there. If you can straighten it out a little.
Oh.
Right there, yeah. So the gentleman in the middle is John Y. Nelson, my great-great-great-grandfather. And the little Indian girl is my great-grandmother. Rose Eckerfee was her name, and her Indian name was Princess Blue Waters. And you can see her mother is standing next to John Y. Nelson, Jenny Lone Wolf, and her brother with the headdress on. So I encourage everyone to get the book. So is there any other parts of the book that's...
Sorry, I failed on that.
Yeah, that's fine. That was a good shot of it. Is there any other parts of the book, Joy, that you want to bring out? And I want to also say that Pete will put it up later. My uncle, Bobby Eckerfee, started a foundation and a trust fund out there called Wounded Knee Community Development Corporation. Here it is here, and we'll share the information on the screen later if anyone feels like making a donation to help the Native Americans. So getting back to the book, what else stood out in your mind? Some of the, you said he was surrounded by bad people.
Oh, yeah.
And he described Native Americans. They were hostile. I mean, they were adversaries with other tribes. They were scalping one another.
It was bad.
Yeah.
But, they got themselves in these situations, and, still it was, I can't go from one tribe to another or that. I don't even know how they would plot anything without technology. It was brilliant. But what I got mostly out of this was human perseverance. They would persevere in the most horrible conditions. The weather, the winter, the horses dying, taken away the buffalo, but they would persevere, and they never stopped. There was a strength in them, in mankind, that just kept them going forward. And that was very impressive. Just the perseverance, I think, is what I took out. And, the book is just fascinating, what they lived through,
Right.
and the whole thing.
And there's been a lot of movies, as we all know, not
Yep.
portraying the Native Americans in a very good light, some of them, going way back to John Wayne. But Kevin Costner recently had a series that was really good about the Great Plains.
In the Great Plains, too, Dick, where it wasn't just the Native American Indians. It was the Mormons. It was the
Right,
Latter-day
Mormons,
Saints.
yeah.
It was the white people. It was the saloons. There was terrible things happening. It wasn't just the Native Americans.
Right.
So you can't really just laser focus on that. Like they were just bad, bad, bad. Everybody was bad out
Right.
there. And like I had said before earlier, that civilization's a great thing. To have these people civilized, because they were not civilized. I think they could have made a greater nation.
Right. I'm
for
glad
sure.
you brought up the Mormons, because just refresh my memory. Not only was my great-great-grandfather very close with Buffalo Bill, who they have a statue you've seen in Denver when you were out there, but he was also very close friends with Brigham Young, who has a famous university, Brigham Young, out in Utah. So it was not only Native Americans.
Right, exactly.
So I'm trying to, I was thinking about different ways how we can get funding for this broadcast. So Chrissy Nome, we all know, the governor of South Dakota, and you have a large population of Native Americans out there. I contacted her office a few months ago and asked her if they had any public funds available, because my goal is to actually drive out there and film parts of the country going out there, and then sit down with some of the Native Americans there. So I asked the governor's office if they had any funding available for that, and I figured they would, but they said, unfortunately, we don't have anything in the budget to put something together. So I'll be doing several fundraisers trying to raise some money to get a documentary done, or if any of the movie producers are watching, I think it would make a great movie. And some of the movies out there today, they're all blood, guts, gore. This is history that every student should learn. And it's not only an adventure movie, but it's also a romantic movie. How he just moved in, he learned the language of the Native Americans, and ended up marrying my great-great-grandmother, Jenny Lone Wolf, as well. Mm-hmm. So I promised my mother that I would do my best to help their cause. And another event that really stood out in my mind, everyone knows who Marlon Brando was, obviously. Probably his most famous role was he played the Godfather. They had 2 or 3 parts. He was brilliant in the movie. But he was also an activist and advocate for the Native Americans. So he finally won an Academy Award, and he boycotted the Academy Awards to accept his Oscar. He wouldn't show up, and instead he sent a Native American woman in their ceremonial dress to accept the award, and he was really criticized by a lot of people in the country and Hollywood for doing that. But I say good luck to him.
That was pretty brave and powerful.
Yeah,
that was a great move.
Yeah,
Great,
he was
great move
brave
for
to
him.
do that. And we're going to get more and more, I think, publicity and knowledge, and I think it should be a standard reading. I talk to my grandchildren a lot of times because they're part Native American, and my 2 children are enrolled members of the Oglala Sioux tribe as well. But it's just mind-boggling that they have no idea of the history of the Native Americans, who were the original inhabitants of our land. And they were treated poorly and had their land taken away from them. I mean, it should be in every history book. I had a conversation with my grandson the other day about it, and about the Pilgrims and coming over here on the Mayflower, and they befriended the Native Americans. And he said, no, they were hostile towards the Pilgrims. I said, no, they weren't. I said they were decimated because they had plagues, but they taught the pilgrims how to plant food and how to live off the land over here because they weren't used. It was a new country they were. And then he talked about Columbus discovering America. And then De Soto was the Spaniard explorer. He went to Florida, landed in Florida, and they killed a lot of the Seminole Indians there. So it's a fascinating race. And the end of the show, we got about 20 minutes left, so I want to reserve some time for it because I did contact, my cousins still live out there, by the way. And my cousin Bobby, he was the first Native American U.S. Marshal in the country. He was appointed by President Clinton, and then he became the superintendent of the Oglala Sioux tribe. And when they had the uprising of Wounded Knee that I mentioned with Russell Means when they took over the reservation, my uncle was there, and he was helped dispersing funds from the federal government to the Native Americans. My cousin from California had moved out there, Harry Ray, and they actually thought that they were siphoning off the money, which they weren't. It was really bad times, and that's when the FBI agents got murdered out there, and they held Russell Means responsible for that, but he was later vindicated. So I do have a clip. It's probably 20 minutes long. They'll bring us right to the hour. And he was kind enough. I was introduced to him by my cousin, Roberta Eckerfe, my uncle's daughter. And his name is Wendell Wisakazmaza, which means the Iron Man Yellow Bull, and he resides on the reservation. So he's going to give you a first-hand look and knowledge of what it is life on the reservation. And he'll talk about the hardships, and we'll end this show with that. So on that note, and I think you're going to find that very fascinating, as I will also. And he served in the United States military as well, by the way.
Sweet.
Quite a historian when it comes to Native Americans. So in token of my appreciation of you coming as my special guest, which I really enjoyed, I have a gift for you. If you want to hold that up in the cameras. And that's the official logo of the Oglala Sioux. And I am going to now tell the viewers the colors of this flag behind me and what they stand for. You can see the blue border around that flag. That blue border stands for the Bluecoats, which was the United States Cavalry at the time. You'll see now there's 9 reservations, but that sun, that red sun, and the red signifies the bloodshed spilt of Native Americans by the Bluecoats on that border. And each teepee is made out of the buffalo hide. And as you said earlier, we spoke, they use buffalo not only to eat, but
medicinally, they never wasted one part of the buffalo.
And to make their clothes, their hides, and their teepees. It's amazing they survive. When I was out there, I said, I can't imagine living in these prairies in below freezing weather in a teepee.
Well, the hides kept them alive.
And they had all natural childbirths, and when the people were on their deathbeds, they just went out in the woods and they knew their time was up and died, and they believed in that big spirit in the sky, which is another painting, by the way, my mother had, the Indian in prayer on the cliff with smoke signals on a white horse. And you just sent me an interesting article about the white buffalo. Share with the viewers what the white buffalo means.
The white buffalo calf.
Very rare.
Yeah, very rare. So they are a spiritual nation, and a white buffalo calf born is very, very rare. And when it is born, it means peace and harmony, and that man has got to change his ways to move forward to a better world. And in, I think it was 1833, a white buffalo calf was born. And we're not talking albino, not blue eyes or anything like that. We're talking a white buffalo, buckskin calf, black eyes, black nose, black hoofs. And very, very rare, and I think only 20 plus have been born since then. That's decades and decades since, one was born in 1833. But in Yellowstone in June, a white calf was born, June 2024.
Wow.
And that is a sign by the Great Spirit that man has got to change his ways for peace and harmony and all good fortune and prosperity.
Amazing.
Yep.
So it's appropriate that
Yeah.
we're doing this
So
show.
it is just absolutely beautiful. I think 2024 is a beautiful year. I know it's kind of crazy out there, but good things are happening through, I believe, the Great Spirit. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you very much for coming on the show. And it's fascinating life that you led as well. You're still a young lady. You got plenty of life left.
Yeah.
And after the clip of Wendell, Yellow Bull, Pete will so graciously put up my uncle's trust fund and foundation that he established. If any viewers care to donate, I once again encourage you to read 50 Years on the Trail. If you like a copy of my revision, 50 Years on the Trail, The Forgotten People, I will give you my contact information. I'll personally mail it to you. It's also available in the United States Congressional Library. And we'll put up my personal contact information, and anyone out there that knows any producers or public service broadcast companies, this is a worthy story to be told. Everyone in our country should learn about the Native Americans and what they meant to our lives. Once again, I'd like to thank Joy Petti for coming on as my special guest. Hope you enjoyed the show. And I want to thank Walpole Public Access Corporation for producing the show. And until our next show, we'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.
My name is Wendell Yellowbull. I'm a great-grandson of Chief Red Cloud. We always refer him to the old man, who defeated the military United States Army on the battlefield. The United States later on sued for peace. So in that iconic historical event, a sacred pipe, or as some would refer, called a peace pipe. I'm the keeper of that Chunupa to Nakota language that was used in November 6, 1868. In talking a little bit about the historical part of who we are, you got to take a look at when after the military and the Native people came into conflict, and then when the treaty was agreed to, then it began the process of us coming to being relocated to here at Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in 1887. And from there, it started the reservation line. I remember my great-grandparents, Charlie and Laura, Red Cloud. They were my great-grandparents, and they traveled through times. They were very, they were really still held the language and their culture, their values and beliefs. They were very fluent speakers. And then my grandmother Nancy and Bill Horncloud. My grandfather Bill was a survivor, descendant of a survivor, Joseph Horncloud, who was there at December 29th, 1890 at Wounded Knee. He was very, he really pursued the issue after the massacre took place, and it was really seeing that a lot of his work, he is the one that actually, with the Hiskili flag, put the monument that is an icon globally across the world, that stands there at Wounded Knee, South Dakota. And my mother, they both didn't have any sons, kind of like their oldest son. But Payroll Woman, Millie Horncloud and Laura were out. My mother was a nurse, and my aunt was one of the kind of first students that went into business college. So it was kind of interesting to see how they evolved into the next generation. Well, reservation life for me as I was growing up, it was my mother and my father, Wendell Yellowbull. They were both ship workers. So one was a law enforcement and one was a nurse for 38 years. So we were kind of getting involved in kind of moving along in a time frame of becoming assimilated into this world. So it was really interesting to see it. I remember as we were going, visiting my grandparents, they were moving from place to place, but it really different in the 60s and the 70s. In the 60s, I was born in 1961, so wasn't really a tune, but as I started becoming older, 5, 6, 7, we started to really become aware of what we're doing, how the world was functioning in the 60s. And as you know, I'm still partial to rock and roll. Now my grandkids and them, they call it classics, but I grew up with that music. Yeah, and living on a reservation, it was more kinship, family orientated, and we lived together. And as we would say, the Kioshpai system is work together and live together, and that's how we lived. With my grandparents, we didn't have any electricity until 1978, and so we basically survived with what we grew during the summer months, and prepared for the winter. We had a cellar to store our food, and we usually we hauled our water, and we had cut wood. August is usually the time when we would cut wood and get ready for the winter. Fall is the time we would prepare, get our meat, and my grandfather raised cattle, so we would be getting the cattle ready and getting things organized. So I think it's really important that we need to really take heed to what's going on today. So I think for me, growing up is really important. My grandfather really stressed education, and so most of us pursued our education, and that's what the old man, Chief Red Cloud, really wanted us to learn the world. In fact, Torah for us to learn. So I would leave it best. I don't know if kids today, we live on the reservation still, and we have a lot of family here. In the 70s was kind of interesting, but we started to participate in the trends that occurred. So for me, it was kind of as we walked from rock and roll, from the peace movement, and then from there we went into the disco movement and called that the Dazed and Confused era. We were conservative and liberal at the same time, so it was kind of really, it was kind of really confused, and we were always dazed. The world was in the 80s we started, and I think it's really here, every trend that went, we were able to adapt. When the disco scene came on, everyone in the school became disco, and they participated. And in the 60s, I want to go back, and a lot of our young people during the 60s, they were either drafted and entered into the Vietnam War. 80s, it was more kind of like peacetime, but it's really interesting to see a lot of our young people going in the military. It really it's beneficial. It helps them realize what the outside world is really about. I want to leave you with that. And for me, the horse culture is very important. It has a lot of foundation within our society. We have songs, and we have a culture based on it. So it's just we're a warrior society. So really, the horses have really a significant importance. Plus, we're very spiritual being. With that, I want to leave you. I hope that I give you about our world, and there are a lot of historical about the Ogalas, and we're one of the, as the United States says, we were one of the very aggressive and very determined. And they were very valiant. We were considered one of the best horse cavalry in the nation. I'll leave you with that. I just wanted to talk a little bit about growing up here on a social aspect of it. My father was a law enforcement in the early 70s, and my mother was a nurse at that time. And so during the 70s, a lot of social movements, the American Indian movement, a lot of the government was actually taking a position to address social unrest. And a lot of it was stemming from the allocation of resources. The government, tribal government, they refer to as an Indian reorganization government, had actually decentralized communities and centralized all the resources. And it became apparent that the resources were inadequately unequal distribution process. And it really affected the community, outlying communities. A lot of them were not getting basic needs met. And those that lived in the Pine Ridge area, they call it the village now, the 9th district, majority that who worked there or who were part of the system usually were at the first, as they would call it, first at the feeding trough. They were, they're still occurring today, getting resources that are allocated by the federal government or some donations or things that would help benefit the people. And it really got to a point where people were getting aggressive and they were addressing the issue, and it just fell on deaf ears. And I think that's the most important part, to understand that the American people, the United States government actually embraced that type of activities because it wanted us to assimilate. It wanted us to be part of the American dream. It was really not our dream. And so it really was used as a tool. It was attrition, mainly that's like historical. They used to hold the rations to our people in order for them to follow policy. And usually the hitmen would really suffer, and the family would suffer from allocation of resources. And that still was underlined what happened in the 70s. It was really implement individuals that were doing a part of the distribution center. But basically, IRA government was a distribution center, so inadequate and unequal distribution process was felt on the outside of the agency. And it really caused a lot of civil unrest because basic people needed food, shelter, and clothing, and really, if they didn't get their needs and medical attention, and they needed money, and because the American dream, part of that is to ensure that we follow the monetary system, and that means they would say cash is king for business people, and it really impacted us because of the high unemployment rate. Not too many jobs are available, and that's the other part of that. As a historical perspective, is a lot of those that came across in the 1800s, they didn't really have a trade. At that same time, the Bureau of Indian Affairs or agencies they had occupations, but it wasn't really meant for those that crossed across the time, because they didn't have the skills that of that time, where they had no training, no background, so they were just basically the TOH system. They were head managers who were giving advice and trying to get their family members to at least get some trade or some type of occupation where they could bring income to the family. As time went on, it became more apparent that through the centralization process, it was not in favor of equal distribution, especially when it came to jobs and housing and certain incomes. So it really impacted a reservation, and it's still here. A lot of them are disguising it with political terminology and things of that nature. So I just wanted to say a few about that.